Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we're doing an in-depth Resto Shaman guide which will be covering Mythic Plus and raids. And this is going to be a long video, and there's going to be chapters at the bottom where you can follow. There is going to be heavy emphasis on gameplay. There's going to be heavy emphasis on hidden mechanics with Wellspring, hidden mechanics with Unleash Life and Covenant interaction. We'll be looking at my Cloudburst usage, we'll be looking at how to heal Prideful. And besides that, we'll also cover things like talents, we'll cover stat priority, we'll cover Covenant choices. So generally speaking, this is going to be a long one. Let me know how you feel about this, and if you do enjoy the content, please do like and subscribe. It helps me to continue with these guides. Let's go and get started. Let's go have a look at talents, and we're going to start off with raid talents. And I've been doing a lot of experimentation. We'll be looking at mythic talents, and honestly, there's been a lot of testing that I've done. And I've tested the row 15, and this is the most hotly debated row out of all of them in my honest opinion, because there's a lot of people picking torrents. But statistically speaking, in terms of numbers, Unleash Life is just a far better option at this given point, especially if you're Necrolord. I'll be talking about how Unleash Life is going to affect your primordial wave. And again, if you're Ventier, Unleash Life also buffs your Chain Harvest. And Ventier and Necrolord are probably the most two popular options in terms of Covenants. So Unleash Life is honestly the way to go. If, and I mean a big if you forget to use Unleash Life, if you don't use Unleash Life, if you're overwhelmed with the amount of buttons that Resto Shaman has, and if you don't use Unleash Life at all, maybe you can go with Torrents. Maybe you can go with Torrents as a passive talent. In terms of HPS based on WoW Analyzer, Unleash Life can generate upwards of 4+% of your overall healing, and Torrents does around 2% or something, maybe even less. So there is a big gap, on top of the fact that Unleash Life has a lot of interaction with other Covenant abilities, so keep that in mind. Unleash Life, in my opinions, in raids and also in Mythic Plus, is probably going to be a very solid option. You should really try and learn how to maximize it. Use it. Undulation, honestly, can be very solid because as Resto Shaman in raids, a lot of your healing is going to be healing waves or healing surges. A lot of them will be healing waves, but we'll talk about that later on. So Unleash Life is definitely going to be a solid pick both for raids and Mythic Plus, especially if you're running Ventier or Necrolord, because they both have hidden synergies. Tier 25 Echoes is probably going to be your main option for a lot of the raid situations. Tier 30 Spirit Wolf is probably going to be something that you're gonna use, especially on things like Hungering Destroyer, where maybe you're picked by the beams and you need a defensive and you don't have your Astral Shift because it's on cooldown. You might go into your Wolf form and try to get a bit of that defensives. So in raid, Spirit Wolf has its usages, definitely. In tier 35, honestly, a lot of the times people will pick Earthen Wall Totem because it shows up on healing meters and it gives a nice absorb. I'll be honest with you, APT Totem is very solid in mythic content, especially on things like I mentioned. Hungering Destroyer, because there are people who get this debuff that can't be healed and you're like, oh hey, this guy's 10% HP, he's gonna die, I'm gonna put my APT. APT is also used on fights like Stutch Fist. There is a lot of hidden usages for APT, especially in mythic raiding. But if you're not sure about those, Earthen Wall Totem is probably going to be a solid option. If you know a good reason why using Ancestral Vigor, that can also be a solid option as well. Generally speaking, again, Earthen Wall. In tier 40, honestly, I really enjoy Graceful Spirit, but I don't get to use it enough because Windrush Totem is so good in raid situations because it provides a speed boost. If you have a lot of druids who have Stampeding Roar, you might not need to get it, but generally speaking, Graceful Spirit, if you really want that healing on the move, or more often healing on the move, Windrush Totem is going to be something that's going to provide your raid with more utility. Tier 45, honestly, these are lock-ins. Cloudburst and Wellsprings, you're not going to change these in majority of the situations in raids, with the exception of Ascendance for Sunking, and we'll talk about Sunking in the gameplay section. And these are some of the Mythic Plus talents that I use or I recommend for a lot of Resto Shamans. Now, tier 15, I think Undulation or Unleash Life, both are solid options, depending on what you need. I think Unleash Life is more versatile in terms of providing single target healing, providing AoE healing, and I guess it is quite a popular option, but I think Undulation is also solid. Tier 25, again, Echoes. In tier 30, this is very dependent on the week. Earthcrab Totem is absolutely MVP, one of the best abilities during Spiteful. When you have Spiteful, when mobs die and they start chasing you, get Earthcrab. It literally makes you, it's literally one of the best abilities that any class has right now because it's a 30-second cooldown and it can completely negate Spiteful. It's very strong. Besides that, a lot of the times I will be picking Static Charge because AoE stun and reduction on AoE stun is very, very solid. Resto Shaman has a lot of utility. AoE stun is one of the biggest things that you can have. Tier 35, again, a lot of times I'm picking Earthen Wall Totem or Ancestral Vigor depending on which affix it is. If an affix scales off the HP of players, I'll ignore Ancestral Vigor and I'll take Earthen Wall all the time. But because in Shadowlands a lot of the affixes don't scale off HP, Ancestral Vigor is a lot more viable. But I do like Earthen Wall Totem in terms of providing this burst reduction during a fight when I anticipate it. So that's why I like Earthen Wall. Tier 40, honestly, a lot of times Graceful Spirit or Nature's Guardian. If you need personal survivability, Nature's Guardian is really, really strong. If you need, again, I'm really big fan of Graceful Spirit because it reduces the cooldown of Spirit Walker's Grace to 1 minute. And all of a sudden, one of the biggest problems with Resto Shaman is healing on the move, and I really, really like having that. But again, if personal survivability, Nature's Guardian is also very strong. Tier 45, again, I feel there's no debate here. Cloudburst Ascendance. This is going to be your go-to for a lot of things because Prideful is a thing and you will be saving Ascendance for a lot of the Prideful. And we'll talk about Prideful healing in the gameplay section later on. So now let's go and have a look at Covenants. And I'm only going to be covering two, and that is going to be Ventir and Necrolord because they're the most two popular Covenants right now for Resto Shamans. I don't want the video to be too long. Generally speaking, what is better for Mythic Plus for raids? I honestly going to say that for majority of people, the difference between the two Covenants is minimal, and you can make both Covenants work. Now, the difference between Necrolord is that there is a lot of synergy between the Legendaries, the Riptide Legendary, which is going to be, I'm going to be talking about later on, which is still very strong for every Resto Shaman who's doing raid in Mythic Plus. But there is a lot of synergy, and it provides different type of healing. Now, Primordial Wave, you're going to want to spread Riptides as much as possible, because once you use a Primordial Wave, it's going to apply a Riptide on a target, and your next healing wave is going to splash healing waves on the Riptide targets. So what does this do? This provides spread healing. It's one of the big issues of Resto Shaman, because a lot of your healing abilities like Healing Rain and Chain Heal are relatively low range. So all the sudden Necrolord ability is pretty good for spread healing. The downside of Primordial Wave, it has no DPS or very low DPS output, because the only thing you can do with Primordial Wave in order to DPS, you can use it to apply Flame Shock instead of applying Riptide on a target, which is okay. So, generally speaking, a lot of the most popular Covenant ability in raids right now is going to be Necrolord. But I'm not saying that Necrolord is by miles better than Ventir in raiding. I actually think Ventir ability Chain Harvest, which is, again, it's a point and shoot type of deal, is probably easier to use than Primordial Wave. Primordial Wave, I'll talk about this, will have a rotation associated with it, especially with Unleash Life. So it's more difficult to utilize. Chain Harvest is more of a use Unleash Life, make sure Cloudburst is down, and use the ability. And it's going to heal and DPS members. So all of a sudden, there has been popularity shift in terms of what's more popular for raids and Mythic Plus. For raids, you'll see, like I mentioned, Necrolord, Primordial Wave. For Mythic Plus, you'll see more Ventir and Chain Harvest people, because Chain Harvest, again, it provides big burst healing. It goes into Cloudburst. Again, Primordial Wave also goes into Cloudburst, but it also provides damage. So that's the biggest thing of Chain Harvest. It does give you DPS, and a lot of Mythic Plus pushers are using it. So my recommendation will be picking a Covenant that you think you're going to optimize more, because I think the difference is relatively small. And maybe if you're pushing really high Mythic Plus, you might lean towards Ventir a bit, or if you're pushing really high-end raiding, you might lean towards Necrolord, but the difference, again, it's not that big. So let's go and have a look at some of the Soulbinds available for Covenants, and in this video I'm going to be using Questionably Epic as a tool to provide differences between the Soulbinds that I end up using. So I'm using Questionably Epic Live, where you can actually use your SimC if you have a Simulation Craft add-on to input your string to actually compare gear, and it's constantly improving, and there's constantly new features added. So I have my Resto Shaman here, where you can actually see stat weight priority for my raid, and I'll talk about stat priorities later on, and I'll showcase them, how you can change them and how I determine stat priority. But generally speaking, we're here to use our Covenants. So I'm Necrolord at this given point, and we're at Renowned week 24 from what I remember. So generally speaking, this shows you the conduits available and the HPS value that it also has associated with it. You can see the Swirling Currents is just by far the best option, with a second option being Heavy Rainfall. Now, Heavy Rainfall is something I'll talk about which fights can really work well, because Using Healing Tide Totem increases the healing of your healing rain by 75% for 20 seconds, and that's going to be based on 184 heavy rainfall. I do think that Tumbling Waves has a lot of RNG to it, but it can be very strong for continuous healing fights like Sludgefist. And again, so how do I do this? You have Marileth here, Emny, and Hymir. Emny is most likely going to be your #1 option because of the fact it has lead by example. So this is something I might pick for this given week. And I'll probably go with Refreshing Waters. And you can see the score at the bottom is going to be 928. Why am I doing this? What does this mean? So this is the overall kind of score for this covenant based on everything. So lead by example is extremely potent source of success, because activating Necrolord class ability increases your primary stat and up to 4 nearby ally primary stats. So this is taking into account that this ability is going to give intellect to other members around you, or primary stats to other members. And this is going to lead to faster kill times in Mythic Plus and raids. So this is why it has such a high score. Swirling Currents is pretty much needed at this given point because it's your #1 conduit. Get it right now. Now, Marileth at this given point, Renown 24, you have 2 potency conduits. So you can go Swirling Currents, you can go around this way. Again, Refreshing Waters is not always the way to go. Vital Accretion can be really strong, especially on fights like Sludgefist where you need that HP to survive. But I'm picking Refreshing Waters right now, and you get 2 potency conduits at this point. So what do I pick? I could go, for example, in raid situations tumbling. So right now the score for this is 849. This is not taking into account that Volatile Solvent. So this is something very important. Using Fleshcraft with nearby corpses consume the essence, completely granting a benefit based on the creature's type. So in raid situations, this has almost a 0 HPS value because you cannot use this on enemies. Or at least there's not enemies to be used your Fleshcraft on. In Mythic Plus situations, you'll notice that anytime you kill a mob, you can go and use the Fleshcraft ability, and you might get a buff that gives you intellect, mastery, or whatever. So all of a sudden, this actually has a hidden HPS value associated to it in Mythic Plus. And I consider Marileth at this given point a very solid option in Mythic Plus scenarios, because you're going to get Volatile Solvent, you're going to get double conduits. What double potency conduits should you use? Swirling Currents is going to be a lock-in, and the second one, in my honest opinion, it depends what you need. So Tumbling Waves can actually give you nice resets. Tumbling Waves is very RNG like I talked about it. Primordial Wave has a 20% chance to non-course cooldown at 184 item level. Now, this can be good depending, again, it's luck based. Sometimes if I need single target healing, I might go Embrace of Earth. Embrace on Earth is going to Earth Shield, increases the healing done to target by 5%. I think this is actually a very solid conduit because tanks are taking so much damage. It's absolutely insane. Or, for example, and I've tested this, I might go Heavy Rainfall for Mythic Plus. Because I do feel sometimes you need extra AoE healing during Prideful. What Heavy Rainfall is going to do, like I mentioned, using Healing Tide Totem increases the healing of your healing rain. So you make sure that everyone is stacked and you use a Healing Tide Totem. Healing Tide Totem in Mythic Plus is not great, but the buff from this is going to be substantial. Make sure you have things like Cloudburst running so everything's going into it. Keep in mind, I have ran this Heavy Rainfall during fights like Council, Mythic Council, where everyone's stacked, and Heavy Rainfall is going to really give me a lot of value. And at the end of the run, you'll notice that my healing rain is like a top heal for that given fight. So why are my recommendations at 24 renowned level? Keep in mind, this will change later down the line. I think Emny is overall a solid option if you can make lead by example worth it. Keep in mind that it has a range. People need to be stacked. So if you're considering the overall group success, this is really strong because lead by example is going to give you primary stats to other members and it's just solid overall. If you're doing Mythic Plus content, I think Marileth is actually a solid option because Volatile Solvent, again, it has hidden HPS values. Just make sure to use Fleshcraft every time you kill mobs and you're going to get this HPS buff, and you have double potency conduits that can be very versatile. Later down the line, I think things will change. I'm not forgetting Hymir. Hymir, if you look at personal gain, is actually a super solid option. If you don't consider lead by example or a group success as a thing, Hymir is actually super solid. And if you consider your personal performance as the most important thing. But at the end of the day, I spent too much time talking about this. Emny very solid for group scenarios where lead by example is going to get a good uptime. Marilith in Mythic Plus can be very solid if you don't forget to use Fleshcraft, and this will change when you're gonna get more renown. In terms of Ventir, honestly, I haven't gone through it yet, but a lot of people are picking Theodar before or when you get enough renown to get your hold your ground. People are gonna go Draven, but that's gonna be a long time, so a lot of people are going Theodar. But honestly, guys, input your values and see what works for you based on the score of this questionably epic tool. Now let's look at legendaries, and honestly, we'll be using questionably epic to determine which legendary we're going to be using. At the end of the day, all of these legendaries are somewhat situational, and some of them would fit, like for example, tank healing niche in Mythic Plus, or let's say DPS niche in Mythic Plus. So at the end of the day, it's going to be dependent on what you feel comfortable with. Do you feel like you can do more damage in Mythic Plus? Do you feel like you need more single target healing? Do you feel like you need overall healing, or do you feel like you need prideful healing? So at the end of the day, Primal Title Core, heads or hand, should always be heads. This legendary, in my eyes, is going to be a no-brainer. If you're doing Raid and Mythic Plus, this is crafted right now, get it to 235, put it in a socket into it. I went with a crit and verse on this. It was a head. At the end of the day, this is going to provide you a solid HPS boost in raid situations. It has a lot of synergy with a lot of covenants. It has solid HPS boost throughout a Mythic Plus dungeon. It is going to be a very solid legendary, especially if you can only craft one. Primal Tide Core is a no-brainer. And now, the next things are all dependent on what you want to focus on. I have to talk about Earth and Harmony, and this is a legendary that's going to be very popular between PvPers. Earth Shield healing is increased by 150%, and you have to remember, Earth Shield healing only is increased by 150% if your Earth Shield target is below 75% health, and Healing Wave adds a stack to Earth Shield to your target. Forget about Healing Wave. Healing Wave, you might not be using it too much because the niche for this legendary is probably going to be Mythic Plus in PvP. Why do I say Mythic Plus? Because targets are actually taking, or tanks are taking, a huge amount of damage. So if you use Earth Harmony, and let's say you're Necrolord, and you go into your Necrolord, let's say Marilith for the time being, and you pick Embrace Earth, Embrace of Earth Conduit. Earth Shield increases healing done to the target by additional 5%. This might be considered the single target healing build. It has been popularized by a certain amount of Resto Shamans who need that single target healing. Do I say you should go Earth and Harmony as second? Not really. It really depends on what you really want. For example, Spirit Walker's Title Totem is something that's going to give you another kind of cooldown after using Mana Tide Totem. The cast time of Healing Wave and Chain Healing is reduced by 50% and mana cost by 25%. So this is something that, again, if you're having problems with Prideful, all of a sudden during Prideful, you just need that extra cooldown because you can't deal with the healing. Spirit Walker's Title Totem might actually be a solid option. The problem with this, it's only available every 3 minutes because of Mana Tide Totem cooldown. Primal Tide Core Riptide Legendary is going to give you more continuous HPS. Earth and Harmony is going to give you single target. Again, you're making a decision between what you want in this given option, in the same way that Jonats as well. So generally speaking, you're picking a legendary based on the situation. Chains of Devastation, there is no information here available, is going to be something that's going to be strong for DPS. Casting Chain Heal makes your next Chain Lightning instant cast. This is going to provide two things. It's going to allow you to, do more DPS because you have to cast Chain Lightning. It's going to also enable you to do healing on the move because if you have to move, you can cast Chain Lightning on the boss, then Chain Heal, Chain Lightning, Chain Heal, Chain Lightning, Chain Heal. So it gives you two different niche situations. Is it going to be the best in pure HPS? Probably not. Is it going to fit your playstyle if you really enjoy the legendary, if you enjoy DPS? It might work for you. So all of a sudden, there is no clear options. There's also another legendary that attaches Earthquake to your Earth Elemental, which also can be a decent option for pure DPS. So, my overall suggestions. Primal Tide Core. Get this first, and after that, see where you want to go. Do you enjoy Chains of Devastation? Some people are gonna hate it or love it. Do you need single target healing and you may be doing PvP? Earth and Harmony is going to be very, very solid. Are you struggling with Prideful? If you're struggling with Prideful, you can also go Marilith Covenant or Marilith Soulbind and maybe get yourself Heavy Rainfall Conduit, which might serve a similar purpose, but that's something for you to decide. So, this is my recommendations for Resto Shaman Legendaries. Now we're moving to stat priors, and honestly, I get this question asked all the time, and I cannot emphasize this more. Pick the highest item level. The highest item level is going to be just the way to go. Majority of the time, intellect is going to be so strong. So this is why I'm going to use my council mythic boss stat priority as an example to show how much better intellect is. So this is using WoW Analyzer, and highly advise people to use WoW Analyzer to really check up on their given stats. And this is going to be my stat priority. You can see intellect being 1, and my second best stat being critical strike being 0.41. So intellect is more than double in effect than my second best secondary. So this is just showcases how much better intellect is, and a lot of the times you're just going to be using highest intellect or highest item level items, and people are just losing their minds about stat priority too much at this given point. Now, there is exceptions. Leech. Leech is something that could have a really high effect, and it's using, and again, it technically is my second best secondary, but Leech, you cannot farm. If you have Leech, you should have your Leech back enchant, and I do have Leech on my rings, which I do drop item level for rings because they don't have intellect, and if they have Leech, you might be dropping it. So the stat priority for raids, after a lot of extensive testing, especially using my own character, I would say that crit is still the best secondary stat, but keep in mind, highest item level. Don't waste too much time on optimizing. Highest intellect, highest item level is going to be the best. Crit being probably the best secondary stat in my opinion in raids, with a consistently ranking really high, at least on my logs and a lot of logs that I checked out. After that, you probably have versatility, and then mastery being relatively equal to haste. The reason why I say mastery being the third option in raids is because you can see my council fight here, and again, this is just a one fight. This does not mean this is the stat priority you should always be using. Keep that in mind, guys. You can see versatility being actually equal to mastery. But if you consider versatility provides damage reduction, and if that's a relative, or if that's something important that you should be looking for, versatility with damage reduction becomes a really strong option. The reason why mastery is also a third option here is because it always varies. Sometimes mastery might actually be my second best stat because people are taking so much damage on fights like Sludge Fist, where people might be relatively low. Maybe mastery is gonna drop a huge amount of value on fights where we're overhealing. So this is why I put mastery as a third option equal to haste, because it always changes and you can't always predict how good mastery is going to be. So this is why crit verse is something that a lot of Resto Shamans are going to be putting on their legendaries or putting crit as their enchant. Keep this in mind. In Mythic Plus, and you can see it here, in Questionable Epic, you can actually right click on your character and you can go into stat weight. So this is something that I'm using right now with crit being around here, haste being around here, haste being a little bit better on mastery in this situation. I can change it. I can change it and make it equal. I can make my leech being a bit higher. Again, leech can change. And I can save these stats, and I can use SimC or import strings to really compare the gear that I have. This is why Questionable Epic is great. So this is something that I use for raid situations. In dungeons, honestly, this changes a bit. And I feel like haste goes up in value significantly. So all of a sudden, I think a general consensus would be something along the lines of crit still being very strong secondary option. And maybe after that you have verse equals haste or haste equals verse, whatever. And then mastery being the worst, because mastery only provides healing. And as a healer right now in Shadowlands healer meta, you have to provide damage. And this is something that could be this might be used by a lot of people. So if you go to dungeons, you can right click your stats and you can see that my stats right now, I'm liking my crit, I'm liking my haste, I'm liking my verse. I'm basically liking all of these stats. And I'm not really too fussed about this. I do like to have a bit more haste, and I sometimes might enchant haste on my rings. Especially because if I want to go more DPS oriented build, because you have to remember crit has no value to lava burst, because you should only be using lava burst on targets that have flame shock. So that's always going to be using critical strikes. So keep that in mind if you really want to min-max it. So generally speaking, guys, honestly, the whole time I spend explaining stat priorities, highest item level, don't worry about it. So let's have a look at Resto Shaman raid healing, and we're going to be looking at different ways of optimizing things like Wellsprings, different ways of optimizing your Cloudburst, different ways of optimizing your Covenant abilities depending on if you went there or Necrolord. There is a lot of different things that we're talking about it, but I want to talk about the bread and butter of Resto Shaman. And at the end of the day, it's all about using your abilities. The amount of logs that I look through of other Resto Shamans who just don't use their abilities enough. They forget to use them, they don't optimize them, and at the end of the day, it's just all about using your abilities. bread and butter. Use Riptide pretty much on cooldown. This is going to be something that's going to be extremely strong. Riptide has already been buffed so many times. The initial heal is strong. It has a lot of synergy with your main legendary, regardless if you're Ventier or Necrolord. Primal Tidecore is going to be your go-to, at least in raid situations. And it's also going to be very strong in Mythic Plus. So Riptide, Riptide, Riptide. Use that as much as possible. Make sure healing rain is down. This is going to be an extremely efficient ability that also, again, you should have a weak core that tells you it's going to heal up to 6 members. So keep that in mind. So the maximum is 6, but in raid situations it's going to be easy to get. Keep healing rain down. Use Riptide on cooldown. Use Cloudburst at the very... We'll talk about Cloudburst maximization and when to use it or when I use it and how to optimize it. But if you're new to Resto Shaman, use Cloudburst on cooldown. And you can pop it early if you know about this or let it expire if you know it's going to heal. But generally speaking, a lot of people just don't use their Cloudburst at all and they don't get any healing into it. Because Cloudburst is going to store overhealing and it's going to store all healing into it, or at least 30% of it. So, Cloudburst, Riptide, Healing Ray. Use it on cooldown. Unleash Life. Use it on cooldown. A lot of the times, Unleash Life is going to be used based on the situation you're going to be in. For example, if someone needs really like single target heal and they're going to die, you can use it into Healing Surge. If there's going to be a lot of AoE healing needed, and your Chain Heal is going to hit everybody, you might use it in Chain Heal. A lot of people will just go Unleash Life into Riptide. And we'll talk about how this works with Necrolord Primordial Wave because it does both your healing waves. So, bread and butter, use your abilities as much as possible. That's literally it for a lot of the times. Now, how do you optimize different things and do you use Chain Heal and things like that? The playstyle of Resto Shaman has changed a lot in raid situations. A lot of the times, it's just basically using your Healing Rain, using your Riptide, using your Unleash Life into whatever situation you need, making sure your Cloudburst is down, and then making sure your Wellsprings is going to be used during Cloudburst. That's very, very important. Making sure your Primordial Wave is going to be used during Cloudburst. That's very, very important. And basically filling in with things like Riptide Healing Wave in terms of spot heal. That's a lot of your raid healing. Because Chain Heal is so expensive right now, and it has been nerfed substantially, not a lot of Resto Shamans are going to be using Chain Heal unless they know that it's going to hit everybody with the bounces, and they have the mana available to make Chain Heal work. So a lot of the Resto Shamans will revert to Riptide Healing Wave. Why are they using Riptide at the start? Because they're generating Tidal Waves. You want to make sure that you're using Healing Wave or Healing Surge when you have Tidal Waves available, because Tidal Waves is going to, the cast time of your next Healing Wave is going to be reduced, or critical effect chance of your Healing Surge is going to be increased. So technically you always want to have Tidal Waves rolling when you're using Healing Surges or Healing Waves. The way you generate Tidal Waves is by using Riptide or Chain Heal. Majority of the time it's going to be generating by Riptide because not a lot of Resto Shamans are using Chain Heal right now in raid situations. So that's something to keep in mind. So how do you optimize the more difficult mechanics? So, Cloudburst. How do you optimize Cloudburst? This is very important. If you're running Necrolord or if you're running Ventier, a lot of the times your Riptide is going to be on cooldown because you should be using it on cooldown anyways. So you won't have Riptide available, or at least you shouldn't have Riptide available because you're using it on everybody that can have it. So what you're going to be trying to do is make sure your Healing Rain is down already, because you don't want to cast Healing Rain during your Cloudburst. So you make sure that Healing Rain is down already, and you activate your Cloudburst. After this, your Riptides should be already on cooldown because you used them before. But what you want to do is you want to use Primordial Wave and you want to use Unleash Life into Healing Wave. That's a triple combo there. So what happens? Your Unleash Life actually buffs the initial healing of your Healing Wave that you casted, and the healing waves that are going to be generated by your Necrolord ability Primordial Wave. So all of a sudden you're getting a huge boost that's gonna go into Cloudburst. So let's go through this again. So you should have Riptides out on everybody because you're using Riptide on cooldown type of deal. So you cast Healing Rain, you make sure Healing Rain's down. You cast Cloudburst, you cast Primordial Wave on people, and then you cast Unleash Life into Healing Wave. And this is going to be an extremely solid way of buffing your Cloudburst. Now, your other Riptides should be on other people, obviously. In raid situations, you want to spread Riptides on as many people as possible. So, when you do that whole Primordial Wave, Unleash Life into Healing Wave situation, the initial Healing Wave is going to be buffed by Unleash Life, and the multiple other Healing Waves generated are also going to be buffed by Unleash Life. So you're getting a huge amount of healing stored into your Cloudburst. And this is going to be something that a lot of Resto Shamans are doing right now. Spreading Riptides, making sure healing rain is down, Cloudburst, Primordial Wave, Unleash Life, Healing Wave. This combo, again, sometimes you might have to save your Unleash Life for this, depending. And after that, what do you want to do? You want to make sure to always include Wellsprings into your Cloudburst. So after you do that combo, you might go with Wellsprings afterwards. And now we're going into the Wellsprings. And Wellsprings is an insanely bad ability. The way that it's coded, and I'm not talking about the HPS is very, very good. It's coded in such a bad way that, first of all, Wellsprings has a travel time associated with it, but the way that it calculates how many people are going to be healed is determined at the end of the cast. So, the number one thing, if you're casting Wellsprings and you realize that, oh crap, my Cloudburst is not down. First of all, you want to make sure, the bread and butter, you want to make sure that you have Cloudburst down, and you want to make sure that you're always going to feed in your Primordial Wave and your Wellsprings into Cloudburst. If you're using Ventier ability Chain Harvest, you have to keep in mind that Chain Harvest is also buffed by Unleash Life. So maybe during Cloudburst you'll do something like Healing Rain, Cloudburst, Unleash Life into Chain Harvest. And again, Unleash Life is going to buff your Chain Harvest, and Chain Harvest is also going to go, or the healing portion, or a partial amount of that healing is going to go into Cloudburst. So that's how I cover both of the Covenants here. Both of the Covenants, this is the reason why I say Unleash Life is the way to go. Both of the Covenants will be affected by Unleash Life. Undulation also affects Primordial Wave in a similar way, so keep that in mind as well. But Unleash Life, I feel, is more versatile. So, how do you work your Wellsprings? Wellsprings has a cast time or travel time associated with it. So, if you're casting, look at this example here. If I'm casting Wellsprings right now, and these are two members that I'm going to be healing. If I cast Wellsprings, and if I activate Cloudburst right after, the healing actually goes into it. The travel time between placing your Cloudburst and the Wellspring Bolt travel time, it actually still goes in. Disclaimer, if everyone's stacked right next to it, the travel time and the time it takes you to press Cloudburst, maybe nothing is going to go into it. So it really depends on the travel time. For example, there's always going to be, if I'm looking at my combat log, there's always Wellsprings healed me. And that heal that healed me from Wellsprings is not going to go into Cloudburst if you activate Cloudburst afterwards. So it's not really optimal to do Wellsprings into Cloudburst because you might miss certain heals. But if you're already casting Wellsprings, activate your Cloudburst after. You might get certain amount of healing into your Cloudburst. It's not going to be the best amount of HPS, but it's going to be some sort of HPS. At the end of the day, what you really want to do is to always activate Cloudburst and then cast Wellsprings afterwards. That's going to give you maximize your HPS. We're going into even more detail on Wellsprings. So, we talked about how Wellsprings has a travel time and how you can cheese it even if you forget to place your Cloudburst. You don't want to do that, but you can cheese it to some extent. Wellsprings also has another very interesting mechanic associated with it. Travel time and how much you can heal. Wellsprings has, by default, a soft cap in terms of healing. If you can heal, for example, at the end of your cast of Wellsprings, the game will decide how many people need healing. How many people are going to be effectively healed by Wellsprings. So this is something that's going to require insane precision and can only really be mastered on fights like Artificer or Stone Generals, or any fight where you have like damage happening in 3, 2, 1, where you know exactly when the damage is going to happen. So for example, at the end of your Wellsprings cast, if you have around 6 members that are going to be effectively healed, the game is going to make sure that Wellsprings is going to heal for a massive amount because it sees only 6 members need healing. Okay, 6 members, that's fine. We're going to be doing a lot of healing. But if you time it in such a way that your Wellsprings is cast during the time when there's only 6 members that need healing or something along those lines, but the damage happens right afterwards during the travel time of Wellsprings, your Wellsprings is going to be healing for an insane amount for everybody. And this healing is going to go into Cloudburst. Because you have to remember, the way Wellsprings is coded is that if there are more members that need healing, more than 6, the amount of healing that Wellsprings is going to be doing is going to be reduced. If there is no healing needed, it's also going to be reduced. So if you're a god tier timing machine, And if you have a boss fight where they say like 3 damage happening in 3, 2, 1, you can technically time your Wellsprings in such a way that it's going to be doing its full healing, and everybody's going to take the damage during the travel time, and you're going to be feeding your Cloudburst an insane amount. I really have considered not including this pad in the video because it is extremely hard to pull off, and a lot of people might consider this as a bug. It's not really a bug because Wellsprings is just coded in such a way that it's really bad. Maybe Wellspring should not have a travel time associated with it because it's causing a lot of these issues. So if you're relatively confused, there are guides about how to optimize it a bit more, and it's only really going to work on fights where you know exactly where damage is happening. So keep that in mind. Now we talked about a good usage of Cloudburst and the spells that you should be using during Cloudburst, but when do you actually pop Cloudburst? And this is going to be looking at my heroic logs because my mythic logs are private and I couldn't find the link to them, but generally speaking we'll be looking at heroic, and heroic logs are somewhat similar to mythic in terms of usage. I do a very simple Cloudburst type of pattern. I make sure that I start off Cloudburst at the very start of the fight in a good way. And after that, I use it on cooldown to some extent. This is not going to work for everything, but I pretty much use it on cooldown, but as long as I start it off in a good way, because sometimes using Cloudburst at the very start of the fight is going to lead to 100% overhealing. And I'm going to go through the logs and I'm going to talk about when I'm using my Cloudburst. Cloudburst has a 15-second duration, and you pretty much want the at the 15-second to explode and do the maximum amount of HPS. So on Shriekwing, the first damage that kind of happens is around 15 seconds or 16 seconds. So actually popping Cloudburst at the very start of Shriekwing is not a bad option. You might delay it a couple of seconds depending on your DPS and things like that, but generally speaking, popping it on cooldown at the start on Shriekwing is pretty good. You can sometimes delay it, but I don't want to talk about this too much because it's going to take the video too long. So Shriekwing, use it in the first couple of seconds, and after that use it on cooldown, and it should be okay-ish. Again, this is my way of using it. You can spend hours about the most optimal way of using Cloudburst depending on content, but again, I don't want to do that. So Huntsman is really kind of weird because there isn't solid options of where to use it, and it really depends on basically your group setup and how you deal with the ads. But you can see that there is, again, I pretty much would use this on cooldown or maybe delay it for the first 30. There's going to be certain damage around 30 seconds. I might delay 10 or 15 seconds my Cloudburst. But honestly, Huntsman is going to be very weird, and it's going to be there's too many variables to really give you a good answer to this. I might delay Cloudburst and use it in the first 15 seconds or so based on this log that I see here. In terms of Hungering is really good because Hunger is going to apply miasma debuff on people for 25 seconds. So technically those people are going to be only leeching HP of others, but you can't heal them. But once the debuff drops, you want to make sure that they're going to be topped up. So technically I make sure to get my Cloudburst. You can see there's a big burst here around 20 seconds, 30 seconds. So I might delay my Cloudburst for around 12 seconds, 13 seconds, and then I pop my Cloudburst. And then it's going to happen around 25, 30 seconds. And this is going to be exactly at the moment that the first debuffs for miasma are going to be dropped off. And those people who might have been 10% HP, they can be healed. My Cloudburst pops, they get healed. So I delay it to around, like I mentioned, 10 to 15 seconds. I don't use it at the start for Hungering Destroyer in the same way that I do it on Mythic as well. So Heroic and Mythic are very similar. Lady Nerva, honestly, there's consistent AoE damage here. I honestly would not delay my Cloudburst too much. I would use it pretty much on cooldown. The Mythic version is a bit different, so you can't change it, but for Lady Nerva, honestly, use it on cooldown, and I think that's going to be okay. Artificer is another one that I would delay. So there's going to be, the first AoE damage is going to be around 30 seconds or so. The first glyph or something along those lines, and I usually use my Cloudburst at around 20 seconds. 15 to 20 seconds is when I put my first Cloudburst. So I don't use my Cloudburst at the start. I kind of use my off healing, maybe I'll DPS a bit, and then around 20, 15 seconds in, probably around 20 seconds in, I pop my Cloudburst, and I know the glyph is going to explode at around 30 seconds, and I should be fine with the Cloudburst detonating, and after that, I'm just popping it on cooldown pretty much for majority of the fight. After Artificer, Sunking is a lot different. I'm not even going to go through Sunking because it's all about single target. I already talked about Sunking's rotation, so we're not going to go through that. Council again is very different as well because it depends on your damage, but generally speaking, the dot ramps up throughout the time, and you can see that there's a decent amount of damage at 20 seconds in, so I might delay like 5 or 10 seconds to use my Cloudburst. But honestly, Council is a very weird fight that is going to depend on your DPS, a lot on your DPS. I don't really feel comfortable about talking the exact Cloudburst timings, but I might delay 5 or 10 seconds at the very start of the fight. I won't use it from the get-go. In terms of Sludge Fist, there is a pushback at the very start of the fight, and you can meme this and use Cloudburst really early, but I don't really advise it because after the pushback, there's nothing really happening for a good bit, and the first bit of AoE damage that's gonna happen is around 30 seconds or so, 35 seconds. So you might actually delay your Cloudburst for quite a long time, for around 20 seconds. So you're not really using your Cloudburst for around 20 seconds or something, and then after 20 seconds you pop it, and then you might get it for the first big AoE burst. So I do have a significant delay on Sludge Fist, depending on how I want to play this fight. After Sludge Fist, and then after that, I'm pretty much using it on cooldown. Stone Legion Generals is another fight that there's going to be a soak. A lot of the times I'm trying to make sure that my Cloudburst is gonna literally hit the soak part of the fight, and that happens again. It really depends, but for our boss fight, we had a significant spikes at around 20 seconds, so I might use my Cloudburst around first 10 seconds or something. For that fight, I do try to save my Earthen Wall Totem during the soaks. It's very, very nice during the soaks for Earthen Wall Totem in terms of Stone Legion Generals, and also for Huntsmen, saving your Earthen Wall Totem during those soaking parts where everyone has to clump up is really, really nice. And for the last fight, Castle Nathria, honestly, this is the fight where I pop my Cloudburst from the very get-go. The very second we pull, I pop my Cloudburst, and it works out pretty well for the rest of the fight, where I'll be using it on cooldown after that. And I found out the best usage by just using it at the very, very, very start. And this is my Cloudburst usage for heroic Castle Nathria. Keep in mind, disclaimer, this is gonna change. This might be different for mythic and things like that, but this is something that I'm using. I'm not saying it's the best way, it's just I've gotten a lot of questions from people asking me how I optimize my Cloudburst. So the next tips and tricks in terms of bosses, you basically kind of know exactly how to play Resto Shaman right now, at least in raid situations, by using your Cloudburst effectively, using your Unleash Life to buff certain Covenant abilities, using your Wellsprings, and maybe even cheesing Wellsprings if you're capable of. What are other tips that you can use in terms of Castle Nathria? For Huntsman, you'll notice that if you're doing a lot of the mythic content as well, that there is a lot of ads that need to be healed. You'll notice that you can't really select them properly except for the Ripped Soul, which will show up on your LVUI boss bars and things like that. So how do you effectively heal those mobs that you have to select without having to select them? You can use things like Healing Rain. You can place Healing Rain on places where those Ripped Souls are going to be placed. And most importantly, you can use things like Wellsprings during that time. If you can time your Wellsprings properly, Wellsprings can almost solo heal those small ads. And if you have 2 Resto Shamans using Wellsprings, you're almost guaranteed to heal those ads within seconds. So you don't even have to select them, you just have to make sure your AoE healing abilities are placed where those ads are going to spawn. I also really have to talk about the guide for Sunking, and Sunking is going to be a completely different fight. You're going to be using different talents, you're going to be using different priority. It's all about single target healing. It's all about cheesing the boss by making sure you get Kayeltas to as high as you can. So, generally speaking, talent build for Sunking is going to be something along the lines of Undulation. It's going to be something along the lines of Deluge. You will probably be using Ascendance, and Cloudburst is also going to be something that you probably pick. So the playstyle for Sunking is all about single target healing. The number one thing you want to do, also I have to mention that if you are using certain or you have double potency conduits or Soulbinds, it is probably worth using Embrace of Earth. Earth Shield increases healing done to the target by additional 7% in order to heal more or do more single target healing. So you might go into Sunking. The number one thing you want to make sure to do is to keep Earth Shield on Sunking. Make sure to do that. It's very, very, very important to maybe have a weak or something along those lines. You can set it as a focus target. A lot of the health frame add-ons will not have a separate section, so you have to manually select it and maybe set it as a focus target. Make sure to apply Earth Shield. Another thing is to make sure you have Riptide rolling on them because of Deluge. That's very, very important. Then you pop Cloudburst and then you pop Ascendance. And after you pop Ascendants, you're basically good to go with healing surges. You're spamming healing surges over and over and over and over and over again. The playstyle might change a bit if you're using Necrolord or Ventier, and you might have to squeeze in something else. And maybe it'll change a bit on, you know, other healers. But generally speaking, Earthshield on the target, Riptide on the target, Cloudburst, Ascendants, and you're spamming healing surges on the thing. You can also min-max the fight by having unused trinkets and using them during that time, during when your Holy Priests are using Guardian Angel if you're doing Mythic raiding, because Guardian Angel is going to be required for that fight in order to cheese it. So that is the playstyle that I would use for Resto Shaman using Sunkick. Now let's go and have a look at Resto Shaman Prideful healing and Mythic Plus healing in general. So Mythic Plus healing for Resto Shaman is going to be very, very different to raid healing, because a lot of the time your bread and butter abilities are going to be Riptide and Healing Surge. Why do I put Healing Surge here? Because mana is probably not going to be an issue if you're doing anything above plus 10s, because you're going to get Prideful, and Prideful is going to give you a whole lot of mana regen. Like I mentioned before, 4 different sections for raids and Mythic Plus, there is mana management to Resto Shamans. Mana management to Resto Shamans is relatively easy. You have Mana Tide Totem, you should use it as often as possible. You should also have an ability to use things like Potion of Spiritual Clarity in raid situations. Or in Mythic Plus situations, if you, of course, you probably won't have time to drink for 10 seconds, you'll probably be using Spiritual Mana Potion. So using Mana Potions, using Mana Tide Totem is going to be the key for mana management. If you have mana available, using things like Healing Surge is definitely a good way to burn your mana. But like I mentioned, this is Mythic Plus. Riptide, Healing Surge is most likely going to be your main source of healing in Mythic Plus situations, because Healing Surge is a relatively fast single target heal. You want to make sure you keep Earthshield on tanks and things like that. This is bread and butter type of deal. A lot of the times, the difficulty of Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus is going to be dealing with your utility abilities. You have an Interrupt, you have an AoE Stun, you have a Fear Totem, you have Spiritwalker's Grace to heal on the move, you have Earth and Wall a lot of the times and things like that. So it's all about Slow Totem. You have a lot of utility to deal with. So a lot of the times, it's almost not even worth talking about Resto Shaman Mythic Plus rotation outside of Prideful, because it's just going to be Earthshield, Riptide, Healing Surge. You're not going to be using a lot of healing rains, because a lot of times people are not standing in healing rains. But what happens during Prideful? There's only 2 things, in my opinion, that are going to really challenge a healer in Mythic Plus, and that is tank healing or Prideful healing. And you're going to be basically selecting your legendaries and to some extent talents and conduits based on what you need more. If you need that, you know, single target healing, Earth and Harmony legendary is a pretty solid option. If you need, for example, Prideful healing, speccing into Heavy Rainfall Conduit could be actually a solid option as well. So how do you deal with Prideful? Prideful is a perfect time to use Healing Rain, because people should stand in your Healing Rain. This is very, very important, especially if you're using Heavy Rainfall for Mythic Plus. So people should be standing in your Healing Rain. You should prime your Cloudburst. It really depends. At the very start of Prideful, there is not a lot of things to do, so you might be using some DPS abilities, at least applying Flame Shock, maybe a couple of Lava Bursts if you can. This should be a pretty much normal, because there's not a lot of stuff happening at the start of Prideful. Prideful is going to get harder and harder the longer it goes. So this is why I delay my abilities. I might delay my Primordial Wave for later. I might delay, if I was Ventier, my Chain Harvest for later on. And the last resource for me would be, rotation wise, I would place my Healing Rain, I would have my Cloudburst, I would make sure my Riptides are all on members. I would probably use, again, Unleash Life. You can use it to buff your Primordial Wave, like I mentioned before, if you're running it. Besides that, I might be using Healing Surges if someone dips low or gets caught by Prideful Stun. And if I'm really in trouble, I'm popping Ascendance. Ascendance is going to be something that I'm going to be using around 50% of the Prideful, depending. Again, it really depends on what key level you're doing. I really want to make sure that Ascendance is going to be something that's going to be, oh crap, I can't heal this anymore. And this is why Resto Shaman is very good at Prideful healing. Their overall HPS and cooldowns are very strong. And at the end of the day, if everyone's really failing, you still have Spirit Link. So how do I, and we're going to move away from Mythic Plus healing because I feel this covers it a lot. How do I optimally use Spirit Link? Spirit Link has a damage reduction associated with it, 10% damage reduction. So at the end of the day, you actually want to use Spirit Link before damage comes out. So if you're in, for example, in a raid situation, you might be, for example, you're doing Artificer and a glyph is about to explode in 3, 2, 1. You want to make sure you play Spirit Link before damage happens because it's going to be doing 10% damage reduction. and all of a sudden, not only the health is going to be rearranged, but it's also going to provide damage reduction before the hit happens. In Mythic Plus, this might be very different. Like, for example, Spirit Link a lot of the times might be used as a tank cooldown. Tank is at 10% HP, and everyone else is full HP. And Resto Shaman doesn't really have a tank cooldown. You're going to be using Spirit Link on the tank, and hopefully some of the melee are going to be in there, and all of a sudden the tank is going to be saved. You also have to make sure to run into Spirit Link and also to redistribute HP. So in Mythic Plus, Spirit Link a lot of the times might be used as a tank saving cooldown, and Spirit Link in raid situations is going to be used, again, for more raid damage reduction. So that's something that you might optimize in terms of playing your Resto Shaman, depending on what cooldowns you have. And this is going to be my overall guide for Resto Shamans. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk, and this is going to be like a small FAQ section. A lot of people have been talking about in terms of staffs and one-handers. I'm using a two-hander staff because my one-hander and one shield are lower item level. At the end of the day, as a Resto Shaman, you want to make sure you have a one hand and one shield, because the shield is going to give you armor, and especially the last 3 bosses of Castle Nathria provide a lot of damage that can be negated with additional armor, on top of the fact that if you're doing PvP, shield is mandatory. So make sure, if you have the same item level, always one-hander and shield are the way to go. In terms of mana consumption, I talked about this. A lot of Resto Shamans are using too many chain heals and too many healing surges, and that goes into raid situations. If you are running out of mana, stop using chain heal or healing surges. By just using Riptide in Healing Wave and your Wellsprings and your Primordial Wave or Ventier ability and Healing Rain, you should have generally a good mana consumption. If you start using chain heal, if you start using healing surges in raids, you're gonna run out of mana. The general consensus of mana management for Resto Shaman in raid situations is that your mana should be at the same level as the boss HP. If a boss is 50%, you should have around 50% mana. So that's like a general rule of thumb. If the boss is 70% HP and you're at 10% mana, you're spamming too much. Take it easy with Chain Heal. Chain Heal is very... Not a lot of people are spamming Chain Heal right now. They're only spamming Chain Heal or Healing Surges in raids in order to burn mana, because they know they have the mana resources. In Mythic Plus, it's very different. Healing Surge is very popular. Again, you will be using Healing Wave in Mythic Plus, because if you have Primordial Wave, because you have to use Healing Wave to proc Primordial Wave. In terms of trinkets, honestly, this is my raid setup. Dark Moon trinket is still very solid option if you have nothing else. The both Sire trinkets are very solid options. The Kabbalist Hymnal is very solid, especially if other people have it in your party. It's not raid, party. So if you're in a raid group, make sure that you're placed in a party group of people that have this trinket, otherwise you're not getting the bonus. And the other mana bound trinket from Sire is also a very solid option. Trinkets this expansion are not amazing. They're somewhat underwhelming. They're not going to break your character if you don't have a certain trinket. A lot of the times it's just going to be about getting your highest item level and things like that. So the trinkets are not insanely overpowered. Anyways guys, this was my video. Again, it was extremely long. If I missed out on something, let me know, leave a comment below, and I'll see you in my next guide.